We've taken the last weeks to see how reckless God's love is, that he came to earth. And we read in Matthew that he came to earth not to save us from them, but to save us from ourselves. He wasn't worried about how we divide against others. He was worried about the evil that destroys ourselves. And we've watched as he's gone through the walls of division. We watched the first 3 miracles in the valley as he touched the leper. And then he moved into the next wall, through the wall of division to the Gentile. And he moved in through the next wall and he healed Peter's mother-in-law, the woman. It's been amazing to watch his life. And this week, we're going to backtrack a bit. I've had a few people who brought up being water baptized to me over the last couple of weeks. And so we're going to go backwards a little bit and go back to the baptism of Jesus and consider its own meaning to our baptism, to our water baptism. And I want to make sure that I'm clear today that we're speaking about water baptism. Some various schools of thought in Christianity, they distinguish between water baptism and spirit baptism, and there's a whole thing there, and we're not going to try to fit that into a Sunday morning, but we're looking at what is this thing where people go under this water and they call it baptism, and what is this? And it's something that many have struggled to understand, and that the church as a whole across the world struggles to agree on. As the church grew out of Jesus' day and it began to evolve complex and competitive theologies, the beauty and the mystery of baptism, it devolved into a hotly debated issue that became abused by churches, and claiming Christians killed each other over it. And so on that great fact, welcome to looking at water baptism. Against 2,000 years of arguing, we're not going to settle the issue. It's not going to happen. We're not going to settle the issue here. But I hope and I pray that today I can open up the idea of baptism. For your consideration, and I can invite you into the grand mystery that I believe Jesus ushered in 2,000 years ago. Part of what I believe many struggle to understand about it is that it's not fully understandable. We exist in a religion that is connected to the supernatural. It means it's above our natural minds, and we don't understand when we go to worship and there's a spiritual dynamic at play. How does it all work? And so there is a side of things that is a mystery to us. We don't know how everything plugs in together. And so as the church struggles to understand it, I think one of the failures is to say, you know what, maybe we don't understand that it's not all understandable. Right now, evangelicalism at large, they tend to hold baptism as, in my experience, something fairly basic. Very often when speaking about baptism, it begins with baptism is an act of obedience. And we take this act of obedience after conversion. Tracing back to St. Augustine, at least, in one form or another, many churches, they say this about baptism. Baptism is the outward expression of an inward reality. This is the idea of baptism that I remember from being a kid, when I was going through kids and youth ministry. It's the idea of baptism that I found at church when I returned as an adult, after I heard the voice of God and came running back. And it's the idea that can be found running through many churches. The idea is that something has been changed spiritually in me when I become a Christian. And at some point after, I undertake an act that expresses to others what has spiritually already happened to me. I have a slide from a selection of churches that is how they describe baptism. And we can put this slide up. And these are grabbed off different church websites. One says, it is the Christ-ordained ceremony that symbolizes an inner spiritual condition that has already come to exist or that already exists. It is your public declaration to others that you decided to follow Jesus. It is a believer's demonstration that God has already saved the believer. It does not make you a follower of Jesus, but it publicly identifies you as having become one. We can leave this up for a second, and there's something important in these descriptions. Baptism in these descriptions is described somewhat universally as directed by Jesus. And it is. Baptism is described in these as a ceremony, a public declaration, a demonstration, or even an identification. And it is. Evangelicalism as a whole has, I agree that you've gotten this right. But what is commonly not present in these descriptions is that water baptism, there's an idea that it can be its own spiritual experience. In these descriptions, baptism is described as a physical event that is taking point at some place beyond and after another spiritual event. It's disconnected. There's a spiritual event that has happened, and baptism is a reflection of what has happened. And I believe this is what begins, you can take the slide down now, but I believe this is what begins with the trouble to understanding baptism and why I believe the practice has really been dying out in the evangelical church. Baptisms, as many churches share it, does nothing with me as a person, in my spirit. In short, the way it's too often sold, I believe, is as our duty to Jesus. But it's a spiritually empty duty. Because the spiritual part that we connect to it, salvation, it could have happened last week, last year, or the last decade ago. And so by the time I come to water baptism, I've been going on possibly 10 years. And I'm like, well, I'm good. What is this physical thing? Does it change me? What happens? And with no new spiritual dynamic being associated with water baptism, baptism sits for many as a box to check. It's a chore to perform. And in this, many churches, I believe, they paint themselves into a corner because they make baptism a ceremonial task of obedience. But then they have, by and large, rejected that being a Christian rests on any task we are to perform. So all of the churches I took the descriptions from, and more, they make clear baptism doesn't save you. This leads to a situation where the church attempts to enforce Jesus' saying, go get baptized. And at the same time, they are forced in their corner of theology to say, but if you choose not to get baptized, nothing changes. This leads to a situation where the first church that I went to as an adult put the issue well in a contradiction within their teachings on baptism. They said, baptism is not necessary for being a Christian, but it is necessary in order to obey Jesus. And what happens now is that the church is stuck in a catch-22. Because now Christianity is divorced from actually any need to follow Jesus. So I believe it's no wonder that the state of evangelical baptism is lagging. It's a reflection of the theology behind it that has evolved into somewhat of a mess. And it becomes to, listen, you really have to do this. Jesus said to be baptized. Yeah, but do I really have to? No, because nothing happens to you if you don't. Against the struggle to get people baptized, the church has, I believe, handicapped itself with destination Christianity. The destination is the place called salvation. It is the safe zone. And in destination Christianity, we come to belly button theology as we look for innies and outies. I score my ticket in. And then I start measuring people up as if they're innies and outies. And I weigh things in light of, does this affect or change my innie status? Does this affect my spiritual belly button? So here's baptism. Jesus says to do it. But does it affect the innie that I have become? No. Okay, then I really don't see the need to do it. Life's been going okay for me. It's not going to bring any big change, and it's not going to badly affect me because I'm sitting here in salvation. I've reached the destination. I've arrived, and this has no bearing on that. Where this ends is that the only enforcement the church has left then is to try to get people baptized is to make baptism a membership box. It's a hurdle to join the church. And then they maybe add some communal shame along with it if you haven't been baptized. I got baptized originally through checking a box and somewhat having communal shame. My friends were doing it, and there was a missions trip to Mexico that I wanted to go on because all my friends were going on it, and I had to be water baptized to go. So it's a ceremony, and as I was taught, there's nothing spiritual that happens in this, so what does it matter if I do it or don't do it? There's some good benefits right now to do it, so let's get it done. The church is right when they call baptism a part of obeying what Jesus wants us to do. They're right when they say it's a ceremony, it's a declaration, and all the rest that we considered. And if that's all we understand baptism for, that's great. That's what I understood baptism was when I did it. It's a ceremony and it's all these things, and now it's very productive for my own interest to get it done, so let's do it. It's okay if that's where you begin. Historically, baptism is undertaken in the infancy of people's faith. It is generally taken early on in faith, when ideas are still developing. And this is before we have a chance to see baptism much more deeply for what it is as we grow through the rest of our lives and we look back on our baptism. The meaning of baptism will build through our lives. And we don't have to understand it fully when we do it. Wherever we start to get water baptized is great. But I'd like to offer you today my view of baptism that has grown into something so much more than a dutiful outward reenactment for something that already was true for myself in the past. I believe that baptism itself carries its own unique spiritual experience in the moment of baptism. To truly consider baptism, though, we do have to continue to wrestle our faith out of our systematic theologies that want to, in our mind, have all the answers. Rationalize things, put them in an orderly system, and have it all explained. We need to move our faith back to straddle the line into the mystical. That there is a mystery part of how things work. When we associate with a supernatural realm and a supernatural God, by its nature, supernatural cannot be fully understood and fathomed by the natural. It cannot be completely placed into our natural minds. But the church has often struggled with letting something be mystical and letting the supernatural truly be super to the natural. 1,000 years ago, the world's church split in half between East and West, in large part because of a fight over these words or those words are the right ones to define what we haven't even seen and can't comprehend. Sometimes we just need to let the mystery remain mystical and be invited into an experience that can't always be captured by our mind. Personally, I am a mystical Christian. That is, I'm a Christian who believes that there is much that we will not ever in this natural life understand within our limited dimensions about a dimension that is super to ours. And I want to understand about how those super to us, God, angels, all of that, have chosen different times and ways to connect across this gap to our world. But very often I believe that those super to us, they use meaningful things in our world to do their work. There's the idea that in Christianity that placing your hand on someone and praying for them is often a way that the supernatural has chosen. This is how we will work, through the love of human touch. And so it's not simply nerves feeling the touch of flesh on nerves, but it is a supernatural event going on behind that. So we come to baptism, keeping in mind the mystical side of things. We come to baptism into what I understand as a beautiful, mystical, spiritual experience in its own right. This is an understanding that has grown the fondness with which I look back at my baptism. It was first simply born out of some peer pressure. Beyond what I and most of the evangelical world would share in common, I think baptism involves two mystical parts. Mystical because they connect us spiritually to the supernatural, and they affect our spirit. But we don't necessarily understand how it works. We just experience and feel it. These two parts of baptism, they trace back to Jesus' own water baptism and the two things that happened to him. First, as attested by New Testament authors, the waters of Jesus' baptism reflect the domain of chaos, of evil, and the place of the damned. It is from the chaos of these waters that creation was first protected. It is into these waters that evil and the wicked were placed during the flood. It is into these waters that the armies of Pharaoh were carried away. And it is these waters that form the barrier of the Jordan River that stood as the last blockage between God's people and their promise. It is from these waters that Adam and Eve are protected as God separates them to place Adam and Eve in the safety of his temple, creation. Noah is protected from these waters. 2 generations of Israelites are protected from these waters as the waters are split and they cross on dry ground. It's into these waters that many sinners have been submerged now by John the Baptist. So the waters continue to do their work upon the world and upon people. They swallow the wicked and they swirl with chaos. And along comes Jesus. And he tells John that he must be baptized. So unlike the Jews, who had twice been protected from these waters, unlike Noah, who had been protected from these waters, Jesus descends into the waters to take his place alongside the armies of Egypt, to lay with the wicked of the world, just as he will then recline with Matthew and the tax collectors later. Jesus will later say, "What good is it to love those who love you? You bear the mark of God when you love the wicked." And it is next to the wicked that he lays in the waters of the Jordan. He lives out these words in his baptism. And he comes out of the floodwaters, and the Spirit of God descends on him like a dove, and we're pulled back to the dove that searched the world after the flood. There was the flood of chaotic waters filled with the evil ones. And the dove flies over these waters, and it searches for new creation to emerge. And it doesn't come back to Noah one day, because it finds the new creation, having come out of the waters filled with the wicked ones. It finds the new creation, and it rests upon it. So here's Jesus. He descends down to be with the decimated ones. He is swallowed up along with the rest of swallowed up humanity. And as he emerges, the Spirit comes as a dove, just like it did back at the flood, and lands on him to mark him as the new creation coming out of these waters. What we're looking at critically today is it's not what Jesus came out of the waters as and then moved through the rest of his life as. We're looking at Jesus' water baptism. What is critically unique about his baptism is that nothing acts upon Jesus. Jesus doesn't change. Jesus changes what is around him. These waters acted upon the wicked of the world at the flood. These waters acted upon Pharaoh's army. These waters acted upon the others. But they cannot act upon Jesus. He doesn't get acted upon, he acts, and he changes. So as he descends into the waters of evil, he acts upon them. And in these waters, he destroys the evil that has been destroying us. And the waters of the damned that baptized many, like Pharaoh's army, they become changed into the baptizing waters of Jesus. They're no longer charged with evil, but Jesus charges them with his presence, his goodness, and his love. So as the slide says that we'll put up about the first mystical part of baptism, Jesus remakes the baptism waters of human history into the baptismal waters of the eternal Jesus. It is within the waters of our baptism that we are set up to have a spiritual experience with Jesus, as he has set these waters aside in a special way for us, opposite of what they used to be. Baptism is in and of itself a spiritual event, like our conversion. It isn't so much a task that Jesus simply orders, but to get baptized is Jesus' direction to go encounter him in a place he has prepared to meet you at. He said, I've made these waters new. Come meet me in them. It's mystical. It's mystical that there are certain special ways in which Jesus or the Spirit of God are uniquely present in our world across from theirs. And there's spiritual moments that take place from the supernatural to the natural. We believe prayer is a two-way mystical street. Somehow God doesn't have physical ears, but we pray to him and he hears, even though he doesn't have physical ears necessarily. And he speaks to us and we hear, even though we don't visibly have spirit ears. The laying on of hands is a mystical event. Christians are concerned about what is marriage. They debate it because marriage in Christianity is a spiritual event. We think something spiritual is happening beyond just a physical ceremony. It's considered by many Christians that in a group of believers, that the verse says 2 or 3, where a group of people are gathered in Jesus' name, there's something that changes about how he's there. So there are mystical moments where the supernatural meets the natural. We look at many of them, and if we say that these can be there, then why would we not say that this can be one of them? Jesus charged this with his own presence as one of these times where the supernatural crosses to the natural. Paul is one who believed this. Paul writes that as you are being baptized, there's a spiritual dynamic taking place alongside just the physical. The second part of the mystical thing that takes place when Jesus is baptized is that while Jesus remakes the water of baptism, you can take this slide off. While Jesus remakes the water of baptism, and he emerges to be marked by the dove as new creation, he also emerges from the waters a sinner. People have been burned at the stake over baptism. Don't burn me yet. It's not that he sinned, but that he so immersed himself in humanity upon his baptism that despite having no personal sin, he socially takes as his identity our sin. From his baptism with the damned and then forward through his ministry, he will be so immersed with the wicked at this point that the line between the sinner Matthew and the sinless Jesus fades away. Jesus will be called by the religious elite sinner. He didn't sin, but he chose to be a sinner. Ultimately, to be killed as a sinner, to die dead set in the middle of sinners. What we find expressed in Jesus' baptism as he descends among the wicked ones is that Jesus, God on earth, had a sin problem despite having never sinned at all. Because he took on sin as a whole, as if it was his own. He so intimately loved humanity and placed himself with us that I believe he truly prays, Father in heaven, forgive us our trespasses. Because he identifies himself with us. The Pharisees would hate and they would ultimately kill Jesus, not because he was God, but because for them he had become God who was acting all too human. You've become too human. God becoming human. God becoming a sinner with us, even though he had never sinned. It begins at his baptism. And Jesus' baptism is a spiritual event as God is baptized into humanity. And we are baptized in our baptism in an equally spiritual event. To be baptized into God, just as he was spiritually baptized into us. Jesus' baptism is where he picks up human life to go die a human death, so that in our baptism we can pick up divine death to then move into divine life. We spiritually knit our natural selves deeper and deeper. We spiritually knit ourselves deeper and deeper into the supernatural. And we don't always understand how this works. But we feel it. We experience it. We can put the slide up now of the second mystical dynamic of baptism. Jesus' baptismal waters mystically immersed him into humanity to die on our behalf, so that our baptismal waters can mystically immerse us into the divine to live on his behalf. There's more details of this than we can fit into today. We're gonna bring back Nate and the kids as we look at our conclusion. I bring this to a close by saying that I'm opening a conversation and a door for you to consider, what is the supernatural God and his connection with water baptism? I believe that it has created a dynamic that includes what evangelicals hold to be a physical ceremonial act. It includes amazing ways to picture water baptism in our natural mind and to illustrate it and describe it and create metaphors. But I believe it goes even further. And there lies waiting within the act of baptism a mystical experience with the spiritual. And this changes baptism from a debatable, do I have to? How big of a change does this really make? To a Jesus-directed, get to. Very often the thief on the cross is held up as one who didn't have to get baptized. So why do I? Many of us don't get a chance to get baptized. Many believers, like the thief, miss out on the experience. But many of us can get baptized. We have the chance to follow the directions of Jesus, who says, go get baptized because I'm waiting for you there. I have changed those waters into something incredible. They're filled with my love. They're filled with my spirit. And I want to meet you in a special way there. Salvation does come without baptism. But the spiritual experience of baptism cannot be had without getting baptized. If all we picture our baptism against is, does it have an impact on me being an innie or an outie? We'll never understand it. But Christianity is not a destination. It's not me standing there weighing, do I really have to do this? Does this affect where I'm standing? Christianity is what the New Testament called the way. It's not an arrival at salvation. It is the step of one spiritual foot after another on a path, along which there lies landmarks of spiritual moments, mystical moments, where the supernatural intends to meet us in a special way. We come to one of these landmark moments when we come to baptism. And the Spirit has said, on your journey, on the way of Christianity, here's one of the scenic sights that you pull over and experience. So here's the invitation before us as we anticipate at least having one baptismal service in the future. It's the invitation to consider getting baptized. To decide if the journey of your faith has brought you yet to the landmark experience of baptism. If you believe so, and you want to join what is at least a 2,000-year-old Jesus-ordained ceremony of celebration. But there might be so much more to it. Then let me know. If you have more questions about baptism that I didn't answer here, or you have deeper questions about what I said here, let me know. Let's talk. But for now, would you join me in worshiping the God who came to earth in the flesh to be immersed so deeply with us that he died our death so we can live his life? Let's worship him.